Okay, let's get going. A few people may join as we start. I'm just getting rid of some notifications. So thank you very much for signing up and coming along today. Anyone who's not here live will hopefully be watching this as a recorded session afterwards. If you want to ask questions as we go through, that's absolutely fine. I think you can either come off mute and ask a question, you could raise your hand, or you could wait to the end and we could have a bit of a Q&A at the end. I'm hoping this will last no more than 30 minutes. There's quite a lot to go through, so I'll get cracking. Okay, some people will be joining as I start the introduction. That's fine. There's no need to catch up. I'll just do a quick introduction to myself because some of you may know me, some of you may not, but my name is Gideon Barker. I am a researcher. I've been in the research industry for about 24 years and have been running my own business for the last few years. And the latest kind of iteration of my business is called Customer IQ. And it's a research consultancy that helps focus of our attention is on working with founders and startups. Why is that? Because I see there's a real need for new businesses, particularly to understand their customers, to do their research, but the industry that I work in isn't particularly well geared up to help them. Research can be very, very expensive and doesn't necessarily have to be. So I'm trying to develop new ways of kind of giving access to good research to founders and startups in particular. So why are we here? Three things hopefully that we'll get from today. Firstly, a little bit of confidence to kind of start maybe thinking about running your own research projects. What might it entail? Can you do it? It's not rocket science and it's not brain surgery, but research is, there are several hiccups and slip-ups along the way that you could make quite easily. So the idea of this is to give you a little insight into how I run research projects to help you to do your own in such a way that you don't kind of fall foul of those mistakes. There is a step-by-step process that I go through, which we'll talk through, and hopefully there's some takeout for you today as well about some tips, some know-how of how to do it well. So the first thing I wanted to do was just make a quick distinction. In the whole wild kind of gamut of market research, I'd say there are kind of two types of market research. That you have kind of market research analysts who analyze, and you have researchers who research. And the reason for making that distinction is because today we're going to focus on the research side of things. So analysts tend to work with pre-existing data. They're not necessarily asking people questions. Very useful kind of for startups in terms of being able to size a market, do some market analysis, maybe do some competitor analysis as well. So it's incredibly useful, valid work for startups, but not something we're going to touch upon today. What we're going to focus on today is kind of research that's asking people questions, that type of research, interviews, surveys, and alike. We'll come on to some of the tools later. So in that, we're collecting fresh data, we're asking people questions, really useful for startups in particular to understand customers, maybe to validate ideas, concepts, maybe start to test early products, and later on develop brand strategy, marketing messaging, marketing campaigns. So in order to run a research project, I would say you need a process. This is the process that I go through. I will be sharing these slides out on email afterwards, so you can take screenshots, you can make notes, but bear in mind you'll be receiving these after the call. So this is the kind of 6-stage process I go through: creating objectives, why are we doing this research in the first place, designing the best way of delivering that research, from the questions that we're going to ask, how we're going to ask them, who are we going to ask, setting up any tools. That might be surveys, it might be other kind of research tools that we would use, collecting the data itself, making sure that we're collecting good high quality data, analyzing that data. So what is it data telling us, what does it all mean, and then using that analysis, those findings from your research, to implement those into your business and to make sure that that research has had some kind of impact, positive impact on your business. So it is a whistle-stop tour. I won't be spending too long on each step. The first step, I feel, is probably the most crucial, and that is creating objectives. I think it's very tempting when you're doing your own research to skip ahead and start writing questions and start sending them out on surveys or start interviewing people. And actually, a little bit more time spent on the planning stage would really benefit, because if we spend a little bit of time thinking about what it is, why we're doing research in the first place, what does the business or the organization need, then it really helps us to kind of set the scope for what we're doing. It means we're going to be focused on actually what needs to be done, as opposed to what might be nice to be done. It really helps us to dictate the kind of method, the research method that we might use. I'll come on to more of that later. It can be quite suggestive of the kind of questions that we want to ask. It can help us when we come to frame the analysis. So what you'll find is when you collect your data, you'll be kind of a little bit overwhelmed by how much data you've collected. So you might need your objectives to kind of help frame that analysis. And you can also use your objectives to judge whether your research has been a success or not, and how you might improve that later, next time. I don't think it's a little bit perhaps kind of daunting almost, the kind of objective setting element of it. You have to think a little bit. I wouldn't overthink it. I think there's a tendency to overplan this stuff. I like to use a kind of hot pen technique, which would be literally holding a pen in your hand and imagining that it's red hot and it's burning your fingers, so you need to write something very quickly. Just get things out of your head, onto paper, onto a document. You've got time to kind of refine that and finesse that later. You can come back and make changes. I don't subscribe to the need to kind of make these smart objectives. I'm sure most of you have come across this idea of smart objectives. I won't go through the whole acronym because I'll stumble and I'll forget one element of it, but I wouldn't worry too much about that at this stage. I would just literally get down onto paper what it is that you need to find out. And you might think about this as two separate things. It might be kind of what does the business need? If it's a startup, maybe you need to find things out like, is there actually a market for our business? Is there a need? What kind of problem are we solving? Who is our target audience? For a more established business, it might be, how do we increase sales? Why are we losing customers? And how do we capture more market share from our competitors? That's just a quick kind of top of mind list, but for your business, for your organization, obviously it will be very different. And you might then want to turn that into a set of research objectives, which would be more, I've put the business objectives here as questions, and the research objectives more as statements. It doesn't matter, just questions are fine for both. But if you take your business objectives and then turn that into a research objective, then you start to think more like, what is it specifically that we need to know? So in this instance, I've said, right, is there a market for our business? Idea. So the research objective would really, for me, would be about sizing the problem that we're solving. Does that problem exist? To what extent does it exist? How bad is that problem? How severe is it? Understanding the kind of emotions around that as well, and as well as the kind of practical challenges as well. So that's kind of objectives. Quickly, we're rushing through that phase, but this is a really important part of the process itself. As I've said, for all of these reasons, and it really helps make the rest of the process much smoother. When it comes to creating some questions that you need to ask, it's a lot easier when you reference back your objectives to say, right, okay, these are the broad objectives we need to stick to. So that suggests to me that these are the kind of question areas. These are then the specific questions. It can dictate to you kind of how you approach your research, what methods you use, etc. So it's definitely something to spend a bit of time on. Hot pen it, just get it out of your head onto paper. Come back to it later, refine it, share it. If you have a team, share it with your team, get some feedback. If you're working on your own, you can come back to it after some time. You've had a bit of time to think about it, and then refine it that way. So the next step would be in terms of designing your approach to the research. How are you actually going to go about it? And, you know, much of what you kind of know about research already will probably fall into two kind of tools, if you like, kind of surveys. Let's do a survey, let's write some questions and host it on a survey and send it out to people. Or it might be, let's do some interviews, let's do some one-on-one interviews with customers. So those are kind of almost two ends of a scale. There's a wealth of different approaches that you could take in between those, and your objectives will very much help you understand, you know, what type of tool is right for your research project. So, you know, as well as interviews, you might think about focus groups. Focus groups can be very good if you have something that requires a little bit of discussion. Obviously, there isn't any kind of discussion element in a one-on-one interview. It's just you and the participant. If you have an idea and you want to get some kind of group discussion going, some, you know, to build that idea or develop some thinking around that idea, then a focus group could be much more appropriate. If it's more about observing people's behavior, ethnography might be more appropriate. Surveys can be very useful in collecting data. Desk research can be very useful as well, maybe in combination with a survey or in combination with focus groups and interviews. So think more broadly about the kind of tools that you might use, and I'm very happy to kind of put some time in with anyone and have a conversation about this and what tools might be most appropriate to your research challenge. It's very much about, as I've said, kind of finding the right tool for the right job. So if you're looking to kind of size things, measure things, surveys are a very good tool for that. As I said before, if you're wanting to encourage a bit of discussion with people, if you're trying to kind of tease out some of the kind of nuances around a particular idea or a concept or a product idea, then a discussion might be more appropriate. If you want to listen to what people are kind of observe what people are saying, you know, there are tools which you can kind of scrape social media platforms and kind of pick up what real conversations are happening. Or it might be you want to run some very small scale experiments and kind of build your knowledge up that way. Back to the process. So we've looked at the importance of setting some objectives, and we can do that as quickly as we like, just to get that down on paper. We've looked at the design, how we're going to actually approach what tools we might use. There's then a phase of setting those tools up and collecting the data. There's a lot of detail that goes into this that we won't cover today, but you know, survey tools are relatively easy to set up these days. They're very intuitive. There's lots of online survey platforms that are very helpful. If you're doing interviews, then you will want to write an interview guide beforehand so that you have a framework to stick to when you're doing your interviews with participants. Ensuring that you're collecting good quality data, making sure you've got the right type of participants, that you're monitoring the quality of your data as you go through. Where are you going to find people? That's one common question that comes up, and I've done a previous webinar specifically about this topic that you'll find on the YouTube channel. But you know, there are various ways of finding people for research. This is one of the stumbling blocks that people often come to, is that they've done a really great job of setting up a survey, writing some questions, hosting it online, sending out a link, and nobody completes it. And there are reasons for that, you know, because maybe you haven't kind of thought about this process enough beforehand. So I've got some various kind of ways of finding people for research, and some pros and cons of each. I won't necessarily go into all of that now, but you can see there are some pros and cons of each approach. Typically, if I'm doing a research project on behalf of a client, then I might use their customer list if they have one, a waiting list, some kind of mailing list that they have access to, making sure that that those people are signed up for marketing and research purposes. That's a really good, easy way of finding people. But it might be for that particular project that they want to look outside of their existing customer base, and they might want to look at some people that are their kind of future customers. So that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate. For doing survey work, I access participants mainly through online panels, of which there are many suppliers of online research panels. You just simply put it into Google and you'll get a large range of results. I'd be quite careful about which ones you use, and again, I'm here to help if you want to have some time with me to discuss, you know, which kind of where to find people, particularly for surveys. I can give you some pointers, because there are some platforms out there which are more sort of self-service, where you can really rack up some high costs by using their participants. So just be aware of there are very many options out there, and I can help with that for sure. I love this book. I don't know if anyone's come across the Marm Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. I think in terms of writing questions and thinking how to frame those questions, this is a really good resource. The first half of the book, you only really need to read the first half, because the second half talks much more about kind of sales interactions and sales calls. But the first half is really helpful in terms of thinking about particularly that kind of customer discovery type of research. So where you're trying to understand an audience a bit more, understand the problems that they are having, and how you might solve it. So there's a really interesting there's a kind of rule that comes out of Rob's book, and I like this, and if we all stuck to this would be super. You know, you're not allowed to tell them what their problem is, and in return they're not allowed to tell you what to build. So listen to them, telling them about their problem, and as opposed to telling them what their problem is and what a great solution you have. I would avoid talking about the solution almost entirely, or at least until, if you were doing, let's say, a half-an-hour interview with somebody, I would spend 20-25 minutes talking about them and their problem and their situation, just to kind of understand them completely, and maybe then spend 5-10 minutes at the end talking about the solution that you have, and understanding the kind of appetite for that and what they think of it. But this is a great book. I'd encourage you to read the first half of that book at least. Okay, so we're on a whistle stop tour. We'll make sure we've got a few minutes for questions at the end. But we've done now the 4 steps of that process. We've looked at our objectives, we've designed our approach, we have thought about the right tool for the right job, and how we might collect the data. The next stages are, you know, you've got that data back, you've done your quality checks, you've made sure that what you've got is good data, because you've set some objectives and you've written some good questions, so you're happy with the data. But you need to understand, you know, what is the data telling us? What does it all mean? And it can be very overwhelming, you know, particularly if you've collected a sample of survey data. It generates a huge amount of data, as do interviews, a different sort of data, you know, text, conversational data, a lot there, you know. So you could spend a lot of time looking through that data in great detail, but you don't necessarily need to. You need to think about, you know, how to effectively get in there and kind of get out what's important. That's where, again, objectives become useful, because you can use your objectives to kind of frame your analysis. So you may have collected data that's interesting but kind of sits outside of your specific objectives of this research. So you don't necessarily need to ignore that, because it might be useful at some point in the future. You know, don't get rid of it, but it's not necessarily going to be helpful right now. So think about framing your analysis within the scope of your objectives. Data can be very dry. Too much data, you know, can be a sort of dry thing to communicate. There is a challenge for communicating data in a more engaging way. There's a whole kind of subsector of research and kind of visualization world which focuses on data visualization and how you kind of bring data to life. For me, it's about kind of using that data to create stories, which sounds a bit odd, and it sounds everyone talks about storytelling. It's a bit hackneyed as a phrase these days, but it's true that stories are really quite memorable. And if you're communicating, if you need to influence people, if you need to influence your team, if you need to influence your stakeholders, your investors, if you need to sort of bring them along with you, then stories are a really good way of doing that. But we're not writing Harry Potter with our research data. We are being accurate to that data. We're being true. We're being responsible. We've gained permission from people to collect their thoughts and their experiences and their behaviors to some extent. So we need to be fair to that data. We need to represent what we've heard in as true and a fair as way as possible. We should be robust in the way that we've interpreted that data as well. So I would say, think more of yourselves as being kind of data journalists, as opposed to storytellers who make stuff up and are very fantastical. But this is rigorous analysis that's told in an engaging way, a bit like a good journalist would. In terms of implementing your research, I make the distinction here between being data driven rather than being data led. What do I mean by that? I think it's tempting sometimes to kind of let the data kind of make the decisions, which I think is not necessarily the best approach. I would say your data, whether that's quantitative or qualitative data, is useful, but it's not there to make a decision for you. And I've seen where this has gone wrong in the past in various kind of businesses where the data says this, so we must do this, and actually that's not necessarily the right path. So I'd see the kind of research, the data, as being another voice in the room. You listen to what it says, you take note, you appreciate that it's of use, but it doesn't necessarily dictate the direction that you're going in. There may be businesses out there who are much more data led, who are successful, but I would say using data to help you make a decision rather than make a decision for you is a much more effective approach. So yeah, be data driven, not data led. Okay, so that is a super fast whistle-stop tour through the steps in the process. We've covered each one to some degree. In future webinars, I intend, and have done before, kind of taking maybe specific parts of this process and going into more detail. And I'm not suggesting in 25 minutes of a webinar that you're ready to start doing your research. But if you are thinking about carrying out your own research project, I'm hoping that this has given you some at least some ideas of the approach that you might take. And if there's one thing that you can take out of this session, I would suggest it would be the objective setting phase, thinking really carefully about what it is you need research to do and how it's going to impact your business positively. And the more time that you can spend on that phase before you jump into kind of asking questions and sending things out, the better the research will be and the more impact it will have on your business. If you are looking for more support, there's a plug here. I do have a course, an online course that's available through my website, which essentially is a kind of extended version of today. It's a sort of 3-hour pre-recorded video course that you can go through at your own pace, and it will take you through each step in much more detail, with many more kind of practical tips and hints of what to do and how to avoid issues along the way. You can access that as a 3-hour course, or you can have it delivered by me. And if you are part of a team, it might be that you can have your own kind of sessions where I would deliver that to your team. But there's more information on that on the website. We've got 3 minutes before the end. Does anyone have any questions? If you want to come off mute and ask a question, it might be that you want to ask one now, or it might be you have a question later, in which case you can just drop me an email and I'll happily answer that.